Morning to everybody once again. Good to see you. Though we got ourselves a rainy morning, which is funny because I don't know if you saw it in the Valley Journal. They're already hyping that, oh, this is going to be one of the worst summers, but yet we're getting all this rain here in the midst of June.
You mean because of fires?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because lack of snow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I think they're up to something.
Yeah.
Yes.
I read the other day that because of all of our spring rain, that the snowpack, like in Glacier especially, is back up to 95%.
Is that right?
Yep.
Wow. Well, you know, Greta Thunberg said that this was going to be the year that everything was going to collapse because of climate control, and here we are. So.
Jinx.
Exactly.
Taking away my childhood.
Alrighty, so getting back to our John discussion.
Oh, yeah. We're doing Bible stuff.
Right. This isn't politics, climate control, or climate change. All right, so we're in John 8. And in John 8, the section particularly that we've been studying for what Jesus is dealing with this Jewish audience is a vital topic that I don't know. I wish more people would just take the time to slow down and study how we're studying this material, and then also just making the proper connections that are needing to be made. So for example, you got the group out there like Andrew Sluter and their dispensationalism to where, well, okay, you got all these different sections, which granted, there are different dispensations in the Bible. Paul writes about that. But you're not needing to go to such a degree to where you're looking at what Jesus is talking about here to this Jewish audience and then saying, but that's, it's completely separated from what we're under today. Because Paul uses the same character, Abraham, in Romans 4 as a proof of how is it that man is going to be saved, justified, and sanctified in the sight of God. So if Jesus is using that same character at this time frame that Paul uses in his writings to Christians, then this has the same application. Jesus is discussing with this crowd on how it is that mankind is going to be saved. And Jesus shows how it is that grace does not exclude works on man's part. And even as we get into chapter 9, we won't get into it today, we will use it for our sermon today, but even in John chapter 9 with the healing of the blind man, we have another clear example of how God's grace works alongside of man's works. So that when we get to passages like Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, and I would say that that's one of the things that's caused a lot of problems with our brethren when it comes to debate, that they don't know how to properly debate Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, so they are scared to death to say that we are saved by work. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just melding all of this and meshing all this together to make sure we're not producing something like what the Jews are having troubles with. So the topics of faith, grace, works, are one of the most confused topics of the Bible, but we studied last time how Jesus himself is attempting to remove that confusion. Jesus came to do a work so man could be saved. So if Jesus is having to work so as to bring about man's salvation, why would it not also fit that there's going to be some type of work that man has to do?
Hopefully you didn't say this, and I missed it, but Jordan did a good job during the sermons at the tent talking about the 7 churches of Asia and the work that was involved there. Did you mention that?
Nope.
Okay.
And so even there, so like with Andrew Sluter, how he would try to get around that is, well, the Revelation is talking about an entirely different dispensation than what we are presently under. So that's just the links that they go to try to remove that element of, well, any works at all. Well, if that's the case, then the Revelation has nothing to do with us. Yes?
I think it's funny that our prime example, Jesus, we're looking up to Jesus, and people say all the time, be more like Jesus. Right. And then you be more like Jesus, and they say it's wrong because there's works involved. And
yeah.
Jesus did works. I'm not supposed to do works. So who are you serving if not Jesus?
Right. So the whole fact of Jesus doing the will of God so as to be pleasing in the sight of God, and then people want to turn around and say, yeah, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do any works to be pleasing in God's sight. Well, if that's what Jesus was required to do, then that's what we're required to do. And as Adrian mentioned, in view of the revelation, Jesus is very much concerned and involved in investigating the works of those Christians, and that it actually played a part into whether they're going to be in the Lamb's Book of Life or not. And specifically in John 8, it's the discussion about Abraham. As we already mentioned, John 8:39, they answered and said unto him, Abraham is our father. Jesus saith unto them, if ye were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham. But now ye seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham, but now ye seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. Ye do the deeds of your father. And the point that's being made here is that our actions show what we believe. If our actions are not aligned with the teaching, then our actions show that we have the wrong father. So it goes back to Matthew 7, the fruit inspection. But even still, so as we're thinking about this from denominational standpoint and how they want to try to, quibble about, well, which comes first? Does the faith come first or do the actions come first? Doesn't matter which one comes first. Jesus is teaching very clearly, if you are doing something, let's say you're doing the works but you don't have the faith. Okay, you're not in the right state. Let's say you have the faith but you don't do the works. You're still not in the right state. It's a co-action together. And to try to emphasize, well, faith is what saves and then works come out of that, then okay, what about a person who doesn't do the work? Everybody in the denominational world will quickly say, well, that person was never really saved. So you're tacking something else onto this. So they'll say no, but they get it. Logically they get it. So,
Mike, can I ask a question?
no, you may not. Yes, go ahead.
The dispensation.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the different dispensation, I know we've gone through this before, but in dumb terms, you're saying that Andrew Sluter with the Revelation would say, so there's the patriarch, I don't want to call age, there's the Mosaic age, there's the Christian age, and then there's Christian age / Revelation, then Christian age / now.
Right.
So then there's different rules for each one of these
Right.
categories. So Abraham had, maybe Adam and whatever had their rules. Moses had his rules. Jesus, Paul, the Christians had their rules, and now we have a different, which is you don't have to pray, you don't have to do anything. That's Andrew Sluter.
Right, according to Andrew Sluter, yeah.
Okay. So just different rules that. So back to the tent meeting, we're saying God has a standard. They're saying those standards change each time.
So just to clarify Jordan's clarification, I have no issue with that point because that is true. From the time frame of Adam to Moses is a different system. They had a different set of rules, different set of laws. But the principle of how a man is saved is the same throughout. So Abraham up to Moses, Abraham was under a patriarchal system. They didn't have the priesthood, they didn't have the temple, so on and so forth, but they still had the sacrifices. And Abraham was the one that was granted circumcision to be brought into covenant. You get to Moses, and Moses says very clearly in Deuteronomy 5 that the law was not given to their fathers. 10 Commandments, Law of Moses, all of that was not given to their fathers, but it was given to them in Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. So then you have a new set of rules that are being brought in. So for example, like the priesthood, tabernacle, Ark of the Covenant, showbread, Sabbath day, Passover, all of that's being established for them. And that they're needing to follow that. And now here we are under the law of Christ, and we're not having to keep the Sabbath, not having to keep Passover, circumcision, all those different types of things. But what is it that ties all of us together? is that whatever system that you are under by God, you have got to follow and obey what He says. And that's faith. Faith and obedience follows through every single one of those systems. And that's the reason why Abraham can be used as a broad example for any age, for any set of rules and laws that God might place upon man on how a person's going to be saved. Because like today, under the law of Christ, we have to hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized in water for the remission of sins. Abraham didn't have to do those things. So how is it that he can be used in comparison with us when he's not required to do the exact same things that we are? It's because he did what he was supposed to do, and he did it by faith. And that's where we are. Okay. We have different commands, but we still have to do it by the same operation that Abraham did, and that he did it by faith. But where the Jews are getting off track is the faith element. They are truly putting their faith in themselves. We're Abraham's seed. We've been circumcised. We're children of the promise. And they're purely looking at that physical element, and they have completely removed God from the equation. And thus, that's part of the discussion that you have Paul having throughout the Roman letter. He also is trying to emphasize to the Jews, you are so focused on yourself that you've completely removed God from the picture, and that everything that would be granted to you is being given to you by the promises of God and not the law. So by going, well, what Jesus is doing here, by skipping over Moses and going all the way back to Abraham, he's removed the law. Now, when I say removed the law, I simply mean the law of Moses, because that's what they were trusting in. We've got the law of Moses, so on and so forth. We're just good to go. Well, if that's what it takes for a person to be okay with God, then how do you explain Abraham? Because he didn't have that law. So the promises do not rest in the law. The promises rest, the promises rest in Abraham. And that's going all the way back to Genesis chapter 12. That through his seed, all nations of the earth would be blessed. So the Jews see no relationship between faith and life. That what they were going through religiously was supposed to have an effect, an impact on how they live every day. God's goodness to them had not impressed any truth on them. And his goodness had not helped them to realize that they were indebted to God. But instead, how did they think about it?
They weren't indebted, they were
Owed.
Yeah, owed.
We don't owe God, God owes us. That's a dangerous spot to be in. But the scary thing is that can happen in any system. If it could happen to the Jews under that system, it can happen to us. Oh, I've been baptized, I'm a good person, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And the third, God just owes me. God doesn't owe you anything. Exactly. When we stop and we think about why we're here today in the position that we are in, it ought to humble us. Every time we think about it. But that's the key. If you do not think about it, you don't appreciate it. And you take it for granted. So Jamie, did Jordan steal your thought, or was there anything else?
No.
Okay, all right.
I'm just keeping up with my notes and just trying to learn with them.
Okay. All right, so get us where we are today. 41. Ye do the deeds of your father. Then said they unto him, We be not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. So as we mentioned in our sermon, they're finally starting to get it. And if you think about it, so just as we mentioned, we are learning about how people behave, how they react, but we're also learning from this on how to deal with people. And we're learning a really good lesson on how Jesus is involved in teaching people. And this is part of the reason why on our broadcast we loop videos for people to hear it over and over and over again. How many times has Jesus made the statement, God is not your father?
4.
At least 4 times. And it's just now sinking in. Oh, he's talking about God. People are dense. So when it comes to preaching and teaching, I can't remember where it was said.
Yeah, there.
Huh?
Yeah, there.
My gut says it was Memphis, so I'm just going to stick with Memphis.
Don't recommend it.
Yeah, don't recommend it. Even though I reference it a lot. I can remember in one of the classes, I think it wouldn't have been one of our preacher training classes because those just weren't worth anything. But it was one of the books of the Bible, and we're going through it, and we got on the subject of how plain preaching needs to be, which is funny now that I think about it that this has come from Memphis because they're some of the most vague individuals that you can deal with. But that they were telling us in those classes, when you're developing your sermons and you're developing your points, do not develop your sermons in such a way that you think that you can just put something out here and people are going to pick up on it. They're not. That's no disrespect to anybody, but as we're learning with the crowd here, what gets in the way of pride, arrogance, envies, jealousies, indignations, tradition, all of these things get in the way of me just being able to put out a principle here and hoping that people will get it. They're not going to get it. And so oftentimes we have the saying of, do I have to spell it out? Yeah. You have got to spell it out to people. And that's what Jesus is doing here.
But that's not the way I spell it.
All right, yeah.
Right?
So here we are, and Jesus is going round and round and round with them on this topic of the Father. Sometimes that's what it takes with people. You don't leave the topic. You don't leave the topic. He's not your father. He's not your father. You're doing the deeds of your father. You're doing the deeds of your father, so on and so forth. Now sets in. Oh, he's saying God is not our father. It's about time. So instead, and the reason why this is being emphasized is what he mentioned before. Instead of being influenced by God, they are ignoring him. You're not behaving like Abraham. And what's happening, so let's read the rest of it, 42 and 43. Jesus said unto them, If God were your father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and came from God, neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Even because ye cannot hear my word. Here's what's happening. Satan, the devil, has taken total advantage of the law that God had given them. And even taking advantage of the promises that God had made, and has deceived the Jews. And that's exactly what Romans 7:8 says. That sin taking advantage or occasion of the law, and the law becomes death unto me. He has taken what God has given to them that was designed to teach them a certain thing, and it's been manipulated. Instead of humbling them and causing them to recognize where they stand with God and how much they actually owe God, instead of humbling them, it's puffed them up. It's produced a national pride within them and put them into a position like Paul writes about in 1 Corinthians 10, take heed lest you fall. And Satan will still do that today. He can do that with the gospel. And that he can do that with us. To where we end up being in the exact same position as this crowd here. To where I will no longer look at myself as being, as Paul said himself, chief of sinners. But then I will start deceiving myself into thinking, well, I'm here because I should be here. I deserve to be here. Look at who my family is. Look at the work that I've done. And just all these different things, these different categories that I could try to lump over to myself so as to tip the scale. When the reality in that situation is just like what Jesus said, those are filthy rags. What has put me here in the position that I'm in, that we're all in, is purely God's grace. Because again, going back to the Roman letter, what does Paul say about both Jew and Gentile? Romans 3. For all
have fallen short.
All right, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Romans 5. When God sent his Son to die for the world, where were we?
Sinners.
We weren't friends while we were yet enemies. God sent his Son. And when we consider that, and that's where we were, and now here we are, and we get to be called his children, that's a blessing. And it's not to be taken advantage of. But also what this will do, with similar to what's going on here, it will cause me, if I have the wrong mentality on this and I allow myself to be deceived, it will cause me to read the Bible and to justify what I want from it. That with this class of Jew, as we studied under the tent, 2 Thessalonians 2, putting themselves in the place of God, as though they were God, yeah, the same thing happening in the church. Preachers and elders making their own rules, setting aside God's rules for their own traditions. They enforce whatever rules they feel like enforcing at the time, instead of behaving justly as God's ministers, as the servants. And thus, truth will no longer influence us, but we start trying to have an influence on the truth. Well, here's what truth is to me. You don't get to do that. Truth is its own separate category, no matter what you think about it. And their response shows their preconceived ideas are the thing that's keeping Jesus' words from being understood. Well, we're not born of fornication. We only have one Father, even God. So Jesus then answers, verse 42, He answered them, If God were your Father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God, neither came of myself, but He sent me. Why do you not understand my speech, even because you cannot hear my words? So God, being their Father, if true, should produce things in their lives. So here we have a whole host of people throughout our community, and they're trying to make the same claim the Jews are here. Oh no, we love God. God's our Father. We're His children. We're Christians. Then how come I don't see any of His attributes, any of His characteristics being produced in your life? Why is it that when I sit back and I examine you, I still see the same worldly person that I saw before? And thus the response, the answer, if that were true, that God were their Father, then here's the natural response. Okay, if God is your Father and you love the Father, well, Jesus is His Son, then naturally you ought to love the Son. So how could they, and thus He's trying to get them to reason through it, how could they hate Christ, the Son, and then turn around to claim and love the Father? Well, it's very easy to do with your mouth. Anybody can do that. But where it really counts is when your action matches your words. And thus something here doesn't add up. And so you have the same type of mentality. So as we're saying about, if God truly is your Father, then that's going to produce certain things in your life. Well, let's go back to our Matthew study real quick. Matthew 5:43, the end of the Beatitudes. Jesus concludes by saying, "You have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor, hate thine enemy." So here's the mentality of the Jews. All right, if you're my neighbor, if you're my friend, which even there, do they really believe that statement about loving your neighbor? No. Okay, because they're stealing from people within their own tribes, their own family. But then you also have the lawyer that comes to Jesus and trying to justify himself by saying, well, who is my neighbor? Okay, so I see where you're actually going here. So you love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. So you see, if we're going to take on this category and we're wanting to be children of God, children of the Father, we're supposed to behave a certain way. For he maketh the sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love them which love you, what reward have ye? So there's the Pharisees right there. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You're nice to me, good to me, I'll be nice and good to you. Do not even the publicans the same? Now there's another, that's an insult, because the Jews hate the publicans. And if you salute your brethren only, what do you more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, whole and complete, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. So here's the standard that we're trying to meet. And that Jesus even says, you can do this. You just have to be on guard about it. You just have to watch out for this stuff. So if God's love has affected me, then I must love others. I cannot be bitter. I cannot be hateful. I cannot be angry all the time and then turn around and try to say, that I have God as my Father. Just doesn't work that way. But yet, we have brethren that are like that. They hold grudges. They're not willing to bury the hatchet unless it's in somebody's back. God's not their Father. And for anybody to say that, that's an extreme claim to make, it is an extreme claim to make.
But it's the truth.
But it's the truth. And Jesus is making the same claim here with his Jewish audience. Now, going back to verse 43, when we're dealing with this idea about why do you not understand my speech, even because you cannot hear my word, what point do you think I'm going to make about the word here? That's here.
That it doesn't mean here, it has a different application. It's actually going to ask you to go over that word. So.
Okay.
Your first night of Revelation, what you're going to go through.
All right. So we're right back in our Revelation study. This is the exact same Greek word. They will not receive it or understand it. It's not a thing of that they can't. It's a matter of they won't. Yes?
Just go back to our Matthew study where the apostles, disciples were not perceiving.
Right.
Why do you not perceive?
Yep.
So they were.
Why are you not piecing this together? I believe, so is perceive your ASV?
I thought it was what we were all going through. I thought it was there, but maybe it could be.
Okay, so maybe it is perceive, and then the Strong's could also be translated as comprehend.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's right. So the word in the text is perceive or perceiveth, but it could be translated as comprehend. They're not putting it together. And it's because of their rotten attitude. That's all it is. You've got a bad attitude, you're starting from the wrong place, and now here somebody is trying to come along and help you, and you do not want to take the help. The things that were interfering, there are things that are interfering with their understanding of what Jesus taught. Happened to them, can happen to us. Whether it be own personal sins that we're just not wanting to give up, and then we see what the Bible actually says about it, and I just don't want to give it up. All right? Then you're not hearing what Jesus says. Our own traditions, our own personal thoughts on things, just everything that we're talking about with this crowd is still going on today. Times change, people don't. So if I approach the Bible with a certain view and I want to only prove my view as being right, I'm not going to understand what the Bible says.
Which, Matthew chapter 3, and the reason I bring it up, we all know, is because that's where you started with when Jesus is starting his sermon, that if a person doesn't come from that place, and that's the key point, that's where you have to be in order, and that's just so impactful for people to understand. And it changed my view on everything, and it changed me.
Yeah.
When I understood that that's where I have to be.
And you can see it exemplified in other biblical characters. Acts 8, the eunuch that's on his way back to Ethiopia, worshiping in Jerusalem, and Philip approaches him and is able to teach him. Why? I mean, here he is. He's a Jew. Obviously a righteous one. He's a, how's it described in Acts 2? Devout. He's obviously devout, traveling all the way from Ethiopia to come to Jerusalem to worship. And then here this know-nothing Philip approaches his chariot and asks him, "Do you understand what you're reading?" Ha! How dare you ask me if I know what I'm reading? If I understand what I'm reading. But how did the eunuch respond?
Not really.
He didn't understand it.
How am I supposed to understand unless somebody teach me? There's the attitude. There's that humility of, I need some instruction. And he was teachable. And he obeyed the gospel. But when we run into people and we start trying to discuss with them about the Bible, who are you to tell me what the Bible says? See, they're not teachable.
It's funny, I was passing out flyers at the job site for our tent.
Yeah.
And one of the guys, he's a guy that does drugs, that goes out, smokes pot, does drugs, drinks all the time. And he started talking to me about the Revelation, and he wanted to tell me that it started, and he wanted to start telling me that, it started and like it's happening right now, and he wanted to act all wise and mighty. And that was just one of those examples that it's like you're trying to invite someone, and they just, I know about this. I'm Catholic, and I can go through this with you. And then I asked him in the end, well, the main question is, are you ready? And I asked him, are you ready for Jesus to come back? And he goes, probably not.
Right.
But he wanted to act like he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
It's just going through what you're saying.
It's just that show. But when we're thinking about this from the category of, well, yeah, this is how everybody else needs to be, this is how I need to be. We all need to study with open and honest minds, not with a mind that's already made up. And then Jesus really brings in the hammer in verse 44. You're of your father the devil. The lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. Jesus gives a very distinct and detailed portrait of who the devil is. And people really need to stop and consider who it is that they are choosing to serve. Because you have people that are out here in the world and they think that they're living it up. They're having a good time, living wickedly and evil, and even some of them have a false idea that they're fine with dying and going to hell because they have the mindset it's going to be a huge party. But look at how Jesus described your master. He was a murderer. And that from the beginning. So that goes all the way back to Genesis. Deceiving of Eve, and how that deception led Adam and Eve to die spiritually and be separated from God. Situation of Cain and Abel. And that's right there in the devil's territory. That a brother would kill his own brother. So you just think about any of the worst murderers that we've had in our history. They don't have anything on the devil. And just think about, well, I wouldn't want to spend any time with those people, then why would you want to serve this person?
I choose the bear.
Right, yeah. He abode not in the truth because there is no truth in him. Truth brings safety. Truth brings comfort. Truth brings peace and stability. Well, if that's what truth brings, and the devil's over here in the category of lies, when he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own because he's a liar and the father of it. Okay, there's no comfort there. There's no rest. There's no certainty. And you're just constantly living in a state of turmoil. What's going to happen next? And you contrast that to what Jesus is offering. All right? The devil has a desire to kill, and he'll mention that again in John chapter 10. he'll contrast that in John chapter 10. No, that's right, because the thief breaketh through to steal and to kill. But what is it that Jesus offers? It's life. And life more abundantly. There's no truth with the devil. He's a liar, the father of it. Well, Jesus is offering truth. And that's where he dwells. That's what he produces. That's who he is. And thus the clear contrast between those two different camps and what it is that Christ is actually offering to this audience. Yes, this is insulting. Yes, this hurts. But it is the truth, and it's an attempt to wake you up so that you'll transfer from this crowd to being in the crowd that you actually want to be in. So when he speaks of a lie, he speaks of his own. I mean, that's back into Matthew 4, when Satan misquotes Scripture to Jesus to try to get him to go against what God's will actually is. That's just who he is. Why would anybody want to be here? Well, as the Hebrew writer says with Moses, sin is pleasurable. But it's only for a time. And that, yes, the Jews in this situation, specifically the Pharisees, yeah, they're getting away with a lot of stuff for the moment. But eventually it's going to come time to pay up. And they're not going to like that. Verse 45, because I tell you the truth, you believe me not. Which of you convinceth me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do you not believe me? Here are religious people, and they're being told the truth. They would not believe the truth at all. And then the question Jesus raises, which of you convinceth me of sin? They've been trying to do this from the very beginning, to try to find something wrong with him, trying to dig up some type of dirt that they can use so as to condemn him. So once again, Jesus is standing before them and he's saying, here I am. Where's your evidence? What have I done or what have I said that proves that I'm guilty of any sin, and especially sin of death? Because he's been discussing this whole entire time how they want to kill him. All right, lay out your evidence. And if it's true, then I'm guilty and put me to death. But if it's not, and I'm innocent, then you need to be following what I say. If you cannot prove that there is some sin to stick on me, then why will you not believe me? He that is of God heareth God's words. Ye therefore hear them not, because ye are not of God. Strong words. Even stronger condemnation to this crowd. John, throughout the study, we've been taught how there's two groups of people that we're dealing with. John 3, Jesus taught Nicodemus, you got the one crowd that loves darkness, and they're going to stay in darkness. But then you have the other crowd, the other side, you have the ones that love the light. And they'll come to the light. Well, what makes the difference? The man that has the right attitude will listen. And they'll come to the light. And they'll be converted. Verse 48, then answered the Jews and said unto him, say we not well that thou art a Samaritan, and hast a devil? Hard-headedness. Hardness of heart. Instead of being pricked to the heart and in realizing who they're dealing with, they try to make an accusation like this. And here's a clear illustration of the way that people will try to ignore answering the truth. What are they doing here? Well, not only is it a matter of, well, what's this? Yeah, you completely left the topic. But there's a really famous logical fallacy that they're committing.
Well, I would say in here, again, they're saying, who are you? When it's already been established by John the Baptist of who he is, and they accepted that, but they're not confirming it again,
Yeah.
because then it reveals their position.
Right?
So they've already tried that. Who is your father? And now they're calling him a Samaritan.
Okay. So they're attacking him, which is ad hominem. Rachel didn't want to say it loudly. This is a logical fallacy where you cannot deal with an argument. You cannot attack the argument, so who do you attack?
The person.
You attack the person.
No.
You try to find something wrong with them.
Bald head.
Huh?
I said bald head.
Right, yeah.
You talking about me?
And here they go, calling him a Samaritan. Now, just think about this. A Samaritan, yes, is viewed as being a half-breed, a dog, if you will, and arguably even worse than a dog. But you also have a situation of, that being the case, but a Samaritan is also considered a traitor. Because a Samaritan was so polluted in idolatry that, I can't remember which king. I can't remember which king it was, but if you do a search in the Kings and in the Chronicles, you will find a king that brought Judah back from idolatry, and they clean house to such a degree that he actually takes an army into Samaria, and they destroy Samaria's place of worship. So when Jesus is having that conversation with the woman at the well about, well, we worship in this mountain, you guys worship in this mountain, at that point, her place of worship had already been destroyed. So there's a fault in her argument that, well, you guys don't even have a place to worship. So what are you talking about? But that's how bad the Samaritans were. And so that's what they're trying to do here. They are just trying to insult him to such a degree to where any respecting Jew is not going to listen to him. Oh, we're not going to listen to a Samaritan. And then to take it a step further, thou hast a devil or a demon. But even in the eyes of the Jews, having a demon is not as bad as being a Samaritan. So that's the reason why they say that first. And we need to watch out for this. This is what people do. I can't answer what you say, so I'm just going to attack you. And we have here a situation of where these people are so entrenched in what they believe that with the truth being presented to them, Jesus says, you're not going to hear God's words because you're not of God. I tell you the truth and you believe me not. And here's where some application comes in for us and even for me. I am very confident in what I believe. But if I reach a point where I cannot use the Bible to defeat a position, and then continue going on against what I cannot defeat, I'm in danger. If somebody presents something to me from the Scripture and I study it out, and I can't find a way to beat it down, with the Bible, and then I just keep going on in my own way and my own way of thinking, I'm right here with these Jews. And that here's some kind of truth and I'm not willing to submit to it. And so we deal with this from the denominational standpoint when we try to talk to them, and they'll say to us, well, you're just not going to change my mind. And what do we say about that person?
They're not willing to hear,
All right.
understand.
Prideful, stubborn.
Now what about us?
I'm humble.
Are we in a position where we'd be willing to change our mind on something?
Should be.
Should be.
Angels.
That's where I was going.
I knew it.
We ought to be ready to change our mind about any position if someone can produce the evidence to prove what they're upholding. Even if that had to do with the topic of baptism for the remission of sins. If somebody were to present a case from the Scripture, not from their personal ideas, but from the Scriptures, that would lead away from baptism for the remission of sins, would I be willing to go? It would be tough. You'd have to present some hard evidence. But if it's the truth, then it's the truth. And I have to be willing to go with the truth. Yes?
The truth never changes.
It's not a matter of truth changing. It's just a matter of us, did we miss something?
Yes, I understand. But there's the counterpoint of, okay, but you've already said, Jesus has already said, the truth will set you free. We can know the truth.
Yep.
I know what your point is, but I don't want to go to that extreme to go, oh, we can find new truths out there like we've been studying in church, whatever the guy is that we've been doing
Go ahead.
the last few weeks. He's saying, I've found this new discovery, which is fine, we can go through that, and I think your point, we should be open to it, and I'm not discrediting anything here. I just want to go to that other side of there's these people trying to go, okay,
Okay.
we are coming up with this new thing that we've found because of, you know,
The idea that truth evolves.
yes, truth evolves and all that. We can't do that.
Yeah.
We can know baptism or not,
Yeah.
or if God loves us or if God has grace or
Mhm.
not.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go fight that or not. And I'm not fighting. I'm just saying I want to get in our brains that, as you're saying, keeping it open. That if someone were to come and prove that to us, then that would have to be the set standard from now on. That okay, then that's truth because truth doesn't evolve. It's
Yep.
not that we found a new discovery. Not disagreeing with you. We were all on the same page. I just want to make a point. I'm not over here going, let me come up with my truth.
So to just bring it into real life application, just with the group here. How much has been presented in the last 3 or 4 years
All of it.
that's had to be altered because of
All of it.
pre-teaching and preconceived thoughts?
All of it.
All right, it's not a thing that the truth changed. It's like we're talking about with all these barriers that the Jews had. Those barriers are the things that keeps the truth from coming in. So I understand what Jordan is saying is that, yeah, truth is not changing. Truth is not altering. It's not evolving. It's not growing. The truth is the truth. But we can have things that can come into our lives, into our minds, into our studies, into our teachings that causes us, just like the Jews, to miss truth. They had a complete misunderstanding about the Messiah. And it's not because it wasn't recorded. It's not because it wasn't there for them to know. there were teachers that rose up during the time frame, that quiet period between Malachi and the book of Matthew, and you had different teachers pop up that were teaching different things. And it got everybody off track. And then Jesus had to come, John the Baptist, Jesus, the apostle, had to come on the scene, steer them back in the right direction. You're looking at this wrong. So that's a good clarifying point of what we're talking about here. Setting aside preconceived ideas and just allowing the word to say what it says. All right, then verse 49, Jesus answered, I have not a devil, but I honor my Father, and ye do dishonor me. So that naturally follows, if you're dishonoring Jesus, the Son, then you're dishonoring the Father. I seek not my own glory. There's one that seeketh and judgeth. Verily, verily, I say unto you, if a man keep my saying, he shall never see death. So there's a contrast between what the devil offers to what God is offering. All the devil brings is death. He is a murderer. Has been from the beginning. But if you will keep my sayings, if you do what I teach, ye shall never see death. That's pretty big. And that's already been presented earlier in chapter 8. And it's going to be presented again in chapter 11. But we have to qualify this, clarify this, in referencing, well, okay, what kind of death are we not going to see?
Spiritual.
The second.
The second death. This isn't talking physically. Because if it was talking physically, Jesus died physically. He saw death. But then what happened? He rose again to not see death again. And then we have once more the problem with the Jews and wanting to look at everything physically. Then said the Jews unto him, now we know that thou hast a devil. Okay, now we know you're crazy. Abraham is dead, and the prophets. And thou sayest, if a man keep my saying, he shall never taste of death. Art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead, and the prophets are dead? Whom makest thou thyself? You see, they just cannot get it. And this is what material, physical thinking will blind the mind from the truth. Here they're making the argument, well, here are these great men, and they have perished, and then you say that you can keep people alive. Well, it's because he's not talking about physical. This is spiritual. And Jesus, it won't be in John, but it's in the other gospel accounts, where Jesus is having a discussion with the Samaritans, and he has to point out to them, Abraham is still alive. The fathers, the prophets, they are all still alive. Because when God spoke to Moses from the burning bush, and he says to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so that right there is a beautiful teaching point and beautiful teaching moment of how careful we need to be when we're reading. Because Jesus is pointing to them, that little phrase should have taught you Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still alive somewhere. And that spiritual truths are not seen through physical lenses. Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father that honoreth me, of whom ye say that he is your God. Yet ye have not known him, but I know him. And if I should say, I know him not, I shall be a liar like unto you. Once again, some very pointed words Jesus has to this crowd, but it's not accusations without evidence. He's already said, you're of your father the devil. He's a liar. So what is it to call them liars here? The evidence is already there to conclude that. But I know him and keep his saying. So once again, they claim God as their own. But again, Jesus sets them straight, that they do not even know him. Now, how tragic it is to be in this situation, to claim God, and then to have somebody stand before you and say, you don't even know who he is.
And call you a liar.
And call you a liar on top of that. You know, I can't think of anything more sad than a situation like this. Because it's one thing for a person to live life and not give one thought to God. To then die lost and without hope and have to face eternity condemned. That's sad. But it is a whole other thing for a man or a person to spend their whole life religious and then be lost. And that Jesus is teaching to us that that person who is religious, there every time the doors are open, so on and so forth, still being lost, and yet that person is not 1 ounce better than the atheist who never opens a Bible. Or never darkens the door of a church building or any religious service. And that there are multitudes upon multitudes of people that are heading this very direction. Deceiving themselves that they belong to God, that they know God. But when they stand before Jesus, He's going to say, "Depart, I never knew you." And it's because they're not living the right way. They're not living in accordance to what Jesus says. If you keep my words, you'll never see death. You'll live eternally. And then Jesus points out, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Now, what this has reference to is how it was that Abraham was able to see the very age, the age of the Messiah, that they were presently living in, though he wasn't there. This goes back to Genesis 22 and that offering up of Isaac. And Abraham is learning a crucial life lesson at this event. What Abraham was learning, and what everybody needs to learn, is that sin demanded a life. If I'm the one that sins, then who should pay for my sin? I should. And yet, when Abraham is just about to offer his son, God stops him. And Abraham learns that God would provide a sacrifice. And that's the ram that's caught in the thicket. That there's going to be a substitute that's going to be given. And the statements that are made in Genesis 12:3, Genesis 15:6, and the entire situation of Genesis 22, it all pointed towards this time right here. And this is the stuff that Peter writes about when he's referencing the grace and the salvation that's been bestowed upon us. And what does he write about the angels? Here we are experiencing it. And what about the angels?
Is it where they wondered at it?
They are desiring to look into these things. They didn't even know how this was going to play out. And they were fully invested. Okay, how's this going to work? How are you going to do this? That's the kind of interest that the angels have, and here we are, and we're living it. It's being revealed to us. So we should really appreciate it. But do we? No, we don't. And here are these Jews. Abraham only saw it in glimpses. He saw it in types and shadows. Never saw the real thing as he lived on this earth. But Jesus says, you know, the little bit that Abraham got to see, he saw it and he was glad. And what's being revealed to this crowd? What are they getting to see?
That they don't see it.
They're getting to see everything. And they hate it. Just once again, showing the separation. This is how Abraham behaved. Look at how you're behaving. 57, Then said the Jews unto him, Thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. There's important terminology that's being made here of what it is that Jesus is trying to show to this crowd. Before Abraham was. So that shows that Abraham had a start point. Abraham was born. He's not eternal. But there again, what Jesus says of himself, I am. That's a God claim. That is a deity statement. Okay, Abraham was born, but I am eternal. I was there before Abraham. And then look at their reaction to this news. Just look at how the children of Abraham are behaving. And then they took up stones to cast at him.
That shows you the kind of hatred they have.
The children of Abraham throwing rocks. And this is how they try to answer his points. If we get rid of him, then we get rid of the truth. No. You further prove his point by how you're reacting. And then we have, when they're trying to do this, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. Just disappeared through the crowd.
Is that a miraculous statement?
I lean towards it being.
Because how else could
Yep.
you? It's like
Smoke
Philip, it's like when they say Philip was there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for him to be the center of attention, all eyes on him, and then you're just going to slip through the crowd.
He put on the one ring.
Right. Invisibility cloak. But here we are. So this is how chapter 8 ends. But this is also how chapter 9 opens. Here we are, and they're wanting to kill him And then what does Jesus take the time to do right after this? I'm going to stop and heal this blind man.
Spit on the dirt.
Seems like you'd be wanting to leave town. All right, boys, it's time for us to get out of here. And that's an important point. That's an important lesson for us to take in. And it really sets the stage for where we're fixing to go for a chapter that a lot of people are familiar with. And what have we been saying about chapters we're familiar with?
You just skim over them.
Just skim over them. You really don't know what's in there. And it really is a beautiful chapter. Because if memory serves me correctly in my reading, there's only 2 verses that are given to the miracle. There's only 2 verses that describe the miracle. And then the rest of the chapter is given over to and dedicated to an explanation of what that miracle means. So like we've been saying in the book of John, John describes the miracle as signs. Signs point to things. They're leading us somewhere. They're trying to get us to a destination. And that's what's going to happen here with this healing of the blind man. Or the man that was born blind, I should say. So that's a teaser to read ahead in chapter 9. Questions, comments on 8? All right. Nobody's raising any hands.